All right, Pat, yet another one, another midpoint. We are halfway through season 3 already. Man, just like the show, time is flying ultimately. I'm not going to lie, I was very much looking forward to this episode. This is probably one of my favorite episodes of the entire show. It's widely hailed as being one of the best episodes of the show. Season 3, episode 5, our overall 25th episode, Kissed by Fire. Pat, any opening remarks before we get started?
Yeah, I think the Talkin TV family is going to agree with me that there's a lot of kisses, not just by fire.
Oh yes. There's some kisses by fire and a few kisses of death, if you will, in this, in more ways than one. All of that and more on tonight's episode of Talkin Thrones. You know, Pat, I think it's really fascinating that we're recording this episode on the same weekend that Dune came out, because George R.R. Martin is one of many people who has stated that he was inspired by the works of Frank Herbert. And now after having watched the movie and seeing just kind of how much they're trying to emulate Game of Thrones just from every conceivable level, it's once again another one of those weird things that happens throughout the history of pop culture where it comes full circle, right? Where Herbert inspires Martin, Benioff and Weiss obviously adapt from Martin, and now Denis Villeneuve is pulling directly from what Benioff and Weiss did as far as trying to capture some of the epic nature, epic grand scale look and apply it to the more creative sci-fi futuristic elements. Have you got a chance to watch Dune yet?
Hey, yeah, I did. It's one of those things where it's definitely more clear, the storyline, than the previous movie, directed by David Lynch.
Obviously, yeah. But we all know the problems surrounding that David Lynch podcast. But again, this is not a Dune podcast. If you guys want to know our thoughts on Dune, you can check in tomorrow night, I should say, when Chris and I put up our episode where we reviewed Dune. I still think it was a fascinating and worthwhile watch, even though I did have problems with how it ended up shaping up. We're not here to talk about that. This is Talkin Thrones, goddammit. We're here. I'm
curious what your thoughts will be on the fact that it's a two-parter, but I guess I'll have to.
Oh, you mean that it's only half a movie? Yeah, don't
worry.
Yeah,
I'll have to tune in tomorrow. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, will this be the first episode that you've tuned in for a while that you actually watch of our podcast?
John, don't call me out on that.
Oh yeah, exactly.
I've checked out a couple of them.
Definitely.
Just remember the one. I think Spiral, the one that I was on.
Yeah, definitely.
Really,
that one, and then probably the Snyder Cut before that one.
Yeah, exactly. So there's been a couple of that I was on. That's the Spiral one, definitely.
Oh, man, that was
basically
so
traumatized me.
That was so much fun. That episode, though. Let's be real here. That episode was amazing. Did we talk for like 10 minutes about Sam Jackson and like whether he was like ordering from the right and how much hell he was putting the DoorDash deliverer through?
Maybe. I remember just being dumbfounded. I had to like process everything about that movie right there on the spot on the podcast.
Yeah.
Just why did that movie exist?
Well, look, if anything, we'll say that it was probably a very therapeutic experiment, if you will. But as much fun as that trip down memory lane was, again, we have the midpoint of season 3 to talk about tonight. Kissed by Fire, our 25th episode, season 3, episode 5. The second episode directed by Alex Graves. This is the third of 11 episodes that Brian Cogman wrote for the show. And it's tough because I think that this season and then the next season 4, when Brian Cogman writes the 2 back-to-back episodes, not the 2 back-to-back episodes, but the 2 episodes, Oathkeeper, where Jaime gives Brienne the sword at the end and sends her on the mission to find Sansa, and then Tyrion's trial episode, The Laws of Gods and Men. I think that these 3 episodes, those 2 episodes, I should say, this episode and The Laws of Gods and Men next season, are probably 2 of the best episodes that he's written for the show, and 2 of the best episodes in general for the show. This episode is one of those ones where there's a lot that happens here. It's not exactly the most jointed together, like it doesn't flow as cohesively as the last 2 midpoint episodes of the last 2 seasons, that being The Wolf and the Lion and then The Ghost of Harrenhal last season. But I think the moments in here are just, they're so damn good. They're so damn good. Like every single moment here just hits, and it hits so much harder than it needs to, Yeah,
it's likely that at this point the characters are really spread out. And the fact is, like, you're not going to have necessarily a cohesive full story episode where everything kind of plays off of each other. Like they're in their different spots in Westeros, and we basically just have to get a little insight into the amazing things that happen to each of these characters.
Absolutely. So let's get into it. Let's start. First awesome moment of this episode. We open right in the middle of the action.
Hey, listen.
Last episode. It's time.
Two men enter, one man leaves.
One
right?
man leaves. Well,
the old Thunderdome, phrase,
Thunderdome,
right?
Most people would refer to it as a trial by combat. For me, this is a trial by fire. Quite literally, the Hound has been found guilty of killing the Butcher's Boy, and so as a result, he's going to fight Beric Dondarrion. But there's a catch, of course, and that's that Beric Dondarrion. He's now a servant of the Lord of Light, and therefore, you know what that means, right? Means flaming
fire swords, man.
Oh man, and I love how they were able to do that practically too. Like, it's funny. I remember watching this as a behind the scenes when they were filming season 7, because they famously obviously bring the flaming sword back when they go on their quest north of the wall. And just the way that they're able to film that practically, like it sounds like such a chore to keep that sword alight like 24/7, because it's like the minute if you wave it in like the wrong direction or with too much force, it instantly goes out. So like I can just imagine them in between takes of constantly having to like, gotta re-oil the sword, gotta light it on fire again. But jokes aside, like it's an amazing scene. It's an amazing fight. It's very close. It's very confined. It's very close quarters. But it's super intense. It's super engaging. It's super in the moment. And I really like how they translated this from the books, where in the books, again, this is another fight that seems like it's super close, seems like it's going to go one way. Beric seems to be having the upper hand, obviously very smartly using the Hound's fear of fire that was so well established last season against him. But ultimately, at the end...
Well, it's also the crowd, right? The crowd is just like going crazy, including Arya, which is like, kill him! Like, right. It's really...
At a certain point, they've gone insane. They're like, what is it? They're like, what is it they're saying about the Hound? It's like, murderer, murderer, murderer. They're like, yes, good is going to triumph, but at the end, the Hound still proves too wily. He brings a crushing blow down, snaps Beric's sword in half, and caves through half of his shoulder. And basically, so he collapses, he dies. Thoros immediately goes to his side, starts praying. At the moment, right, when it aired, you don't know what was going to happen.
Yeah, and then this is when Arya like grabs a dagger and jumps, and goes to kill him, but gets stopped. And then, what does Beric say? He basically says like,
the Hound first says something really snappy, which I love, which is looks like his God loves me more than him, And,
but then it's something about like go to hell, right?
Well,
Arya says,
he says burn in hell, and the next thing you know, you hear the words from Beric saying, "Oh, he will, just not today," as Beric has magically been brought back once to life. As this is the first instance in which we see the Lord of Light's true power, right? We got a hint of it last season with Melisandre and the Shadow Baby, but this is the true instance where, again, compared to all the other religions that we've come to know, the Lord of Light, if channeled properly through a red priest, has the ability to bring people back from the dead. The sucky thing is that this only ends up becoming the payoff through which they're able to kind of cheat and bring Jon Snow back in season 6, and there really isn't that much payoff to it after the fact. But at the time, this was a really cool reveal. It was really interesting. It was something new. It was something different that really hadn't been seen in fantasy, because the only real example that we'd had of it before, at least from a mainstream sense, was Gandalf coming back to life in Lord of the Rings, and there's all sorts of problems about how that's explained and what that means and from a characterization standpoint. But at least at the time when this was introduced, this was something new. This was something that really hadn't been done before, at least not in like that sense, just in general. And it was really, really fascinating, especially considering that at first, you're prepping yourself for what seems to be like a tragic death, although a messy one at that. And then completely after the fact, it's literally like, okay, and I love it too how Beric once again shows that he's an honorable character by not doing the cheap and easy thing, which is like, oh, you killed me, but I came back to life. He's like, no, even though I'm back to life, you still killed me. I'll do the honorable thing. You won. You're free to go.
But then like 2 episodes later, he just sells Gendry. So like, hey, whatever.
Well, it's like Thoros later says, it's like, hey, we're honorable, but to a point. We do need the gold in order to fund it. And then I love how in the next scene, the Hound is literally like, piss on your piece of paper. I want my goddamn gold. He's like, yeah, we're keeping your gold. Sorry, you're not getting away with everything. He's like, you're nothing but a bunch of thieves. He's like, yeah, we're outlaws. Of course we are. We steal. It's part of our thing.
Yeah, and then they basically put a sack over his head and let Clegane go, on his merry way.
Yes, indeed. And like that's the primary bulk of the storyline, but there's 2 important scenes that followed up. One where Arya runs into Gendry, finds him mending Beric's armor. Arya is just so disillusioned at this point. It's like she was told that these men were honorable. She thought that they were going to do the right thing. but they let the Hound go. They didn't let her. She didn't kind of get her revenge, and now Gendry's.
Well, they have this nice moment talking about family, right? Gendry thinks he might have found family in this group, but Arya basically says, "Hey, no, they're not worth anything. Like the two of us could be family."
Right.
Is basically what she says, and at this point, Gendry doesn't really believe wholeheartedly in the two of them
right.
going off on their own.
Right.
He thinks he's found a place, and as we know by watching this show, we know in an episode or two that's going to be problematic for him,
to say the least. But I think the big takeaway from this scene that kind of is hammered home, at least for Arya, and why I think this is really important as far as for this sector of her arc, is that it kind of once again outlines that she still kind of really doesn't have this understanding where she thinks that everyone she meets is going to be friends with her, but she doesn't quite understand like the class struggle and difference. She doesn't really understand Gendry's point of view. She just thinks, in her mind, she's still the whole mindset of, Lannister's bad, Starks are good, and she doesn't really see it because Gendry sees it as something completely different, where it's like, my maester sold me. The Lannisters I had to worry about being dead every day. And what? I'm going to go serve your brother and just to get the same thing from a highborn? And he's like, at the very least, the Brotherhood, they're shady, but at the very least, they all kind of have come from like the same place as him. So they have, this feeling of relatability for him that really Arya can never quite understand. And he's like, at the very least, Beric was chosen to lead, unlike just inheriting it just because, he had a certain family name, So that's something that Arya really doesn't understand. And again, it sucks because even though her and Gendry have this really special bond that's formed over this past season of them kind of surviving on their own together, and ultimately they are still worlds apart as far as that goes. And Arya still is very inexperienced despite all that she's learned in her journey. The only other real, I think, interesting scene is what comes after this, which is when she has that sit down with Thoros and Beric. And again, it's the first of a couple moments in this episode that, for me personally, just really, really hit home as far as the emotions go. Because the other thing that I love about this episode is that Brian Cogman does something really interesting, where this is after a couple of episodes that have only pretty much exclusively been written by Benioff and Weiss. And the thing I love about most of the Brian Cogman episodes, not all, I have problems with some of his later episodes, but the thing that I love about a majority of the Brian Cogman episodes is that whatever character he chooses to focus on in that episode, he really kind of hammers home the point of what that character stands for. Like Jon in the first episode that he wrote for season 1, Cripples, Bastards, and Broken Things, with him, and then with the thing with Tyrion, with giving Bran the harness, the design for the harness. And then in season 2 with What Is Dead May Never Die, really focusing on how efficient Tyrion is as a hand and the beginning of Theon's downfall, just as a Greyjoy, once he begins the whole invasion of the, once he decides to ally with his father and everything. And now we have that here again, where this is the first of really every character that we get, where Arya, again, she has this moment with Gendry where she really discovers that they are worlds apart. And then she has this moment with Beric and Thoros. It starts out pretty humorous with exposition where it's like, Beric is like, how many times have you brought me back now? And Beric's like 6, and they recount all the different times and ways that Beric has died over the course of the last couple seasons since he originally left King's Landing. And then Arya has this really sweet, really sad moment after she, breaks down with Thoros. She's like, okay, so I'm a hostage. You're selling me. And he's like, don't think of it like that. And she's like, but it is that. He's like, not so much. He's like, nah. She's like, nah, it is. She started to wise up. And then she has this really tender moment when she asks, he's like, could you bring back a man without a head? And of course they know who she's talking about. Because of course they have a lot of admiration and respect for Ned when he was alive. And Beric tells her, he's like, even if Thoros is like, I don't think that's how that works, At the very, because I think the biggest thing that's established here is that despite the fact that the Lord of Light does have the ability to bring people back from the dead, there are a couple caveats to it. It has to be done within at least a couple of hours of them dying. And the damage to the physical body can't be so severe that it would cause some form of impertinence. The worst that Beric has done is, again, his shoulder got caved in half, but for the most part, it's just cuts, stabs, and one hanging. Ned fully got his head severed off, so that's not going to work just in general. And it leads to this really sweet moment where it's Arya, where they're like, Ned is resting now. He's in a better place. He doesn't have to deal with all this chaos. And, I wouldn't wish my life upon that. And Arya's kind of like, I would. Because, it's these brief little moments that once again reinforce, that Arya truly does feel her lineage with the North. And it's really one of the few things that's keeping her going. And that, she misses her dad. And it kind of sucks. Because
well, I think it's 2 seasons later after Ned gets executed and she's still traumatized, still hasn't really processed everything. And this is one of those moments where she throws it out there hey, could he possibly get brought back? And them letting her down softly and saying, hey, that's not how this works. I think this is the moment where she could start really processing things and moving on and, starting to look forward to how life is going to be. She's relatively in a stable spot compared to what she's been dealing with the last 2 seasons. So I think it's one of those things where, now what's life after King's Landing?
Right.
What's life after her father died? I think she's going to start, having a different outlook on things other than just trying to escape the Lannisters.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. And so the cutting to the next big character moment that Brian Cogman writes in this episode. I'm going to cut briefly to North of the Wall before we get back to the Riverlands, because this is really the only one sequence we get.
We're talking about the steamy scene?
The steamy scene. Oh, man. And it just gets steamier and steamier every time I watch it, because so we had Sam and kind of the breaking down of the Night's Watch in the last episode, and now we cut back to Jon with the Wildlings. It starts off with, a really interesting scene where Jon is with the little band led by Tormund that's heading to climb over the wall, right? They're going to continue their plan to attack the wall from the south.
Yeah, it's like, how many men do you have? And
they're being
Jon's like 1,000.
Yeah,
They're
being interrogated by Tormund and Orell, and like Jon's in such a tricky position here, where Jon is constantly trying to battle it out between like making sure that the Wildlings continue to think that he's got some sense of loyalty, even though he knows that they don't fully trust him, and rightfully so, while also trying to maintain loyalty to the Night's Watch. And his vows are continuing to be tested, because it's obvious that Orell doesn't trust him, both for the fact that he wants Ygritte, but she's very clearly into Jon, and the fact that he doesn't trust Jon. Tormund has more of a respect for Jon, really, because of his reasoning why he gave Mance. Orell obviously wasn't in that tent, but like Orell is kind of testing him and poking him and prodding him and trying to provoke him and see where he is. And Jon almost falls for it, where he's like, where he drops the wood. He's like, oh, what's going to happen if I kill you? And what's going to happen to that eagle if that happens?
Oh, yeah. Does it drop dead immediately, or does
Tormund
it
has to kind of come and break it up? Ygritte sticks up for him, and afterwards, Jon's like, I don't need you to stick up for me. And Ygritte's like, oh, really? Who was it that stood up for you in front of Mance and in front of the Lord of Bones? Looks like you owe me something. She steals his sword. He chases her into the cave. And, of course, it results in them, well, we all know the scene.
Well, yeah, listen, it's you know nothing, Jon Snow. It's definitely the line, and I think that line basically cements the two of them as like a fan favorite couple.
Yes.
And we're engaged in that storyline, from if you weren't engaged before this moment, you're definitely engaged, and you want to see how they basically make it out of the tough spot. Like, the Wildlings and the Night's Watch are at each other's throat, and like the two of them it's basically a West Side Story, but north of the wall.
Pretty much.
They're on opposite sides.
West Side Story.
Well, Romeo and Juliet, whatever love story you want to bring.
But the one's a remake of another, so.
Yeah, so basically, like, that's what we're getting. It's a tried and true formula. Like, I think we're all on board, and the fact is, I think how that storyline plays out, and we'll eventually get there. Is I think it's something that's it's handled really well, and the fact is, I can't say that I didn't expect it to end the way it does, but it's one of those things where it's right now we can enjoy it. We can enjoy the banter back and forth between the two of them. Basically the pillow talk, so to speak. They're just. Really also, teasing each other and everything.
You want to talk about more humorous dialogue when Ygritte starts recounting all the boys that she slept with after Jon admits that he essentially lost his virginity to her, and he's like, okay, I got the picture. That was just hilarious.
Yeah,
like, it's one-liners are just flying at a mile a minute. And like, what I'll say about this scene is that I have slight problems with just how this scene is characterized, because once again, it becomes obvious that this is another example where this is a kind of a fictionalized, like, dream girl that's written by a guy who very clearly did not have a lot of female interaction just in general in his younger life, because let's face it, that's the case with most authors. But what I like about what it does is that it really kind of irons home Jon's struggle here, which is that, again, he is trying so hard to maintain his vows to the Night's Watch, to remember Corrin's words, to keep going undercover with the Wildlings. But like, he's starting to learn more about them, he's starting to realize that they're really not what the Night's Watch has brought him up to. Not what the Night's Watch has made him think about them, and also like he's falling for this girl, and it's understandable why.
We're also, as an audience, being shown that the Night's Watch, even though they're tough vows, and you're not supposed to lie with women or marry or have children or whatever. It's like, yeah, those are the rules, but ultimately Jon Snow basically just broke those rules this episode, as we'll see, with Sam later on. Like he basically breaks the vows, and it turns out that the vows are not
Very
necessarily
flexible. Very flexible because like I said, it's the whole thing. And Maester Aemon says again, it's like if we beheaded every brother that went off to Molestown, with the wall would be run by headless men or something like that.
Yeah, and then Sam also like he's like, well, look at the words. They don't exactly outlaw
They don't
this.
say anything.
You know, so
about
basically,
relations. They only say no wives or children. There were no wives or children involved here, so
yeah, exactly. So it's very
yeah.
No, I'm just saying it's very interesting that we're sort of, slowly being introduced to what it is to really be part of the Night's Watch. And I think that's part of Jon's story where it's like, it's kind of this scary thing, if you're a robber, criminal, whatever, shamed your family, whatever it happens to be, you get sent up to this like hard place. But ultimately it's really not, as cruel as you would expect it to be.
More freeing in a way is the strange thing. And then I just wanted to bring up Jay's comment, and then they got married in real life. Yes, indeed they did, because Kit Harington and Rose Leslie are now happily married with a kid. So, hey, what do you know? Some Hollywood romance stories do happen indeed. Again, it's a brief scene. It's a very memorable scene. Again, it's been a very talked about, very meme scene. It's obviously where the title of the episode comes from when Ygritte talks about, again, the idea of redheads in this universe are referred to as kissed by fire, which I think is a really interesting terminology and phrase that I hope to eventually use in real life at some point. But moving on. So back to the Riverlands, we then have again. It happened earlier in the episode than I thought, because for the longest time I thought that this scene happened at the end of the episode, but it actually there's a couple sequences that happen after it, which is probably for me like. We obviously talked about how we've talked ad nauseum about how Jaime and Brienne probably have the best arc this entire season, but this is the moment that solidifies it, where they arrive at Harrenhal. Finally, they're greeted by Roose Bolton. Locke's trying to make a bunch of stupid jokes. Roose Bolton immediately disregards him, is like, get them to the quarters, make sure they're taken care of. He sends, he has this really interesting moment where he tries to bait Jaime and trick him at first, where he's like, where Jaime asks him at King's Landing. Roose is like, how do I put this? Stannis marched on the Blackwater, and he does the dramatic pause too, like he totally is.
Yeah, well, he's definitely making him think that Stannis basically won the Battle of Blackwater. I think also the other thing that Locke does is basically Bolton sees the hand around his, Jaime's neck, and he says, "Oh, you've lost the hand." And Locke is like, "No, he has it right here." And basically Bolton speaks down to Locke, and almost like he's frustrated and wish that this wasn't the case, like that Locke didn't take his hand. But it makes me think that that's just for show, right?
Right.
Bolton basically has to appear to Jaime and Brienne to a certain degree as someone that they can negotiate with. And so looking at Locke and saying, hey, don't say another word, talking down to him, almost like chastising him. I think it's one of those things where Bolton is, playing some mind games here, not only with the Blackwater stuff, but also with the interaction with the hand and Locke in general. So
right.
Bolton has some real plans behind those eyes.
It's the beginning of the first of couple hints that are saying that Bolton, again, if it wasn't already clear from last season, again, we still don't know who Ramsay is. There's no Theon or Ramsay scenes in this episode, thank God. But this is the continuing of the fact that Bolton has got some plans that maybe don't involve Robb in the future, just from the way that he's treating Jaime, and then later, obviously, with how he decides to handle Brienne by thinking that she could be a problem. But this is the kind of the beginning of that. But again, it leads to, so Jaime's obviously sent to see Qyburn, famously, obviously, the maester who's been stripped of his chain, and we obviously begin to hear some of the inklings of that there about that. And, Qyburn obviously wants to take the whole arm off in order to prevent any more infection. Jaime's like, if you take the rest of my arm off, I will kill you. He's like, he's like, all right, best I can do, I can cut off the infected flesh. He's like, all right, that'll do. And he's like,
oh, yeah, what does he say? He says basically, I could also probably get rid of the corruption by soaking it in boiled wine or something like that. There's a lot of pain involved, yes. And like you said, the milk of the poppy.
It's a painful process, and it looks painful just from the way that like Nikolai Coster-Waldau carries it. Like he's like, I don't want milk of the poppy. He's like, it'll be very painful, and he's like, then he's like, it'll be painful. He's like, I'll scream that. He's like, very painful. He's like, I'll scream loudly, and it shows. But,
yeah, and it's a really good sound transition out of that sequence and into the next part of the episode for sure.
Like the way that it wraps up though, like this is for me personally. I don't know if you feel the same. The moment where Jaime comes in with Brienne and they have that moment in the bathhouse, top 5 moments of the entire show for me. Like, this is just from a writing standpoint, a monologue standpoint. This is obviously an actor's dream. This freaking rules. I had every single word of this monologue, like when I read it in the book originally, when I watched it in the show for the first time. It's one of my favorite, my most rewatched scenes, where it starts off, Brienne thinks that Jaime's just trying to encroach on her. She doesn't want to be around him. He thinks that she's insulting her more. He says, no, I want to make peace. I don't want to keep fighting, and he opens himself up to her. He gets real emotional with her. He finally makes her see a side that he has really probably not told anyone ever. Probably not even Tywin or Tyrion for that matter.
Well, it's the whole story. Yeah, it's the whole story of the Mad King and the reason why he actually went ahead and killed him. And so it happened to be with the whole, wildfire and willing to kill his citizens, basically.
Right. Despite Robert Baratheon.
Yeah, and there's this great moment in the monologue where it's like, as I put the blade in his back, he was just he didn't really expect
burn them all.
Yeah, he didn't think he was going to die. He just kept saying burn them all, burn them all, burn them all.
Yep.
So it's one of those things where this particular scene with Jaime Lannister, it opens him up to redemption for everything that we've seen in the first 2.5 seasons. It's one of those things that makes him human. It puts us on his side now that he's at a low moment. He was someone that, did this honorable thing that they're revealing to us that this was almost honorable. But the whole entire world sees it as, he's the Kingslayer.
Right.
He betrayed his king. He did the cruelest thing possible. But the current Game of Thrones, what's happening now wouldn't be plausible. There would just be a ton of dead citizens if it wasn't for him. Right. So it's one of those things where it kind of makes him a lot, hugely complex, because we've seen the worst side of him, and now we're starting to get to actually see the other side that's going to really lead us into the rest of the series. Like, Jaime becomes a little more humble from this point going forward.
Absolutely. And like the way that he kind of brings in each new element of the story that he's telling, where he first starts it off by asking her if she knows what wildfire is. Then he starts by introducing like kind of, the beginning of what was going to happen on the day. He describes the action. I also think it's very interesting too, where he's like, yeah, he listened to the Pyre Master. Again, I begged him to surrender. Varys begged him to surrender. But for some reason, he only listened to Grand Maester Pycelle, who we know is only loyal to one person, and that is Tywin Lannister, who, of course, urged Aerys, open the gates to Tywin Lannister. He'll be on your side. He'll help you, knowing full. And Jaime, of course, knew the truth as far as that goes. Again, there's a reason why Tywin got to King's Landing first before Robert did. He wanted to cover his tracks. He wanted to make sure that he seemed like he was on the winning side, because famously, the whole thing is that for the longest time, very similar to Walder Frey, Tywin sat out a majority of the rebellion because he wanted to see how it was going to go, because he didn't want to choose. He had famously retired as Aerys' hand after the whole, and this is kept out of the show, but after the whole decision that Aerys made to make Jaime a Kingsguard member just to spite Tywin, and that famously caused Tywin to retire as his hand in order to rob Tywin of his Golden Boy, because he thought that Tywin had too much power. And so Tywin famously, he wasn't going to make his stance known, but he obviously had to wait until the position was clear, obviously, on both sides. And famously, obviously, it's known that the Lannisters are the one that sacked the city and ended up murdering the Targaryen babes, which is what's going to bring in the Oberyn Martell and the Martells into the fray next season. But the thing that I just love about the way he phrases it is the way that Jaime kind of, how he's able to categorize the madness of Aerys Targaryen by saying it's like he was willing to kill himself and his citizens, and because he was so crazy, he thought that he wanted to burn with the rest. He had no intention of escaping, because he thought that if he died and was consumed by the wildfire, he would rise again as a great red dragon. He's like, I cut his throat just to make sure that didn't happen. And then he says, he's like, if he tells Brienne straight up, he's like, yeah, if you had to choose between if your precious Renly ordered you to murder your father and then stand aside and watch while every innocent citizen of the entire city went up in flames, would you do it? Again, a very obvious foreshadowing as to what's going to come later in the final season. But it's a really harsh choice, because Brienne, of course, now all of a sudden realizes this terrible burden that Jaime's been carrying all these years with, bearing the title Kingslayer, Oathbreaker, all of these different things that, again, all these titles, people have harped on them because they never understood the real trauma. And she even asked him, is like, if that was the case, why didn't you tell Ned? And he's like, Ned? Ned would, Ned was so, and Jaime even says it, like, Ned is so far removed from everything. He had no idea what he was in for. The only thing that brought him in was his loyalty to his sister and to Robert as his friend. He could have cared less otherwise. He's like, you think I'm going to explain myself to Ned Stark, who judged me the minute that he saw me standing over the king, who only ever lived by his oaths, and he even says, he's like, by what right does the wolf judge the lion? Still hiding behind that veneer of, that the Lannisters are better than everyone else before he collapses. And Brienne catches him, obviously, and, says that the Kingslayer needs help. And it's all topped off by the cherry on top when he says, Jaime, my name is Jaime. I just, one of the best written scenes, quite possibly in the history of television. It's so impactful. It categorizes who Jaime is to a T, and it really, to me, does set him up for the rest of the show, as far as, like, this is the true transformation moment where he becomes a lot more humble. You understand him in a way that you really never did before. You understand kind of the struggle, the burden that he deals with, of constantly having to be, the golden boy, the fighter, the survivor, where his loyalties truly lie. And it's brilliant. It's one of those moments where it's like, yeah, I truly do have no words, because it's so well done,
Yeah, no, exactly. I think, watching it for like the third time here, the only thing I could think of is, hopefully, after he passes out, they wipe down his face, because there's a lot of dirt. But no, I agree with you. Pretty much, this is a well-written scene. It is probably up there as one of the best monologues in this series. And, everything about it just really sets you up for what's coming. Obviously in this season, we still have the bear pit, and we have what Jaime does to save Brienne. There's just so many moments, like, everything that we've seen before this, like, basically, putting a spear through the back of, Ned's leg, or at least his, one of his men did, basically.
And then he punches that man because he wanted the kill.
Exactly. So, he also thought he was going to, he could have lost to Ned. So
True.
He wanted to see who was the better man was. Never really got to see that. But, he put Ned and the Starks through a lot of stuff, pushing Bran out the window. All this stuff is really attributed to Jaime. We see some of the terrible things he's done. But in this scene, it's just the reversal of, hey, maybe, he was wronged, for what he did, killing the previous king. And, it's maybe that burden has led him to make some awful choices. But, deep down, maybe this guy actually has a conscience and he can actually do good things. Maybe he is not the sort of the
monster that we all think he is.
Maybe there's a little gray area. Maybe it's not black and white like the show really established in the first 2 seasons.
Absolutely, 100%. And there's one more storyline that you have to cover in the Riverlands. Oh man, River Run, Robb. I mean, we all know that this season has slowly been building to the fact that Robb is ultimately going to fail, but this is the moment where it's like,
everything that happens here.
That goes wrong, and everything happens. First,
first of all, Karstark kills Tomlin again.
The first time that Tomlin died on the show. Yeah, they break in and murder the 2 Lannister boys that they have as captives.
They're what are they, like the cousins or something like that?
Like Tywin Lannister's, what is it? His uncle's brother's great grandsons or something like that.
Again, they're just out. Lannisters that are out of the way. And
right, exactly. They're out of the way, and the problem is, again, the motive here is so bad. Where Rickard Karstark is so hell bent on revenge that he's willing to murder innocent boys just in order to avenge his sons. And Robb even says it. It's like, yeah, they were boys. It
was like how many people? Like 5 people to kill some boys.
5 people to kill 2. Not even like boys that were in fighting shape. Like they weren't even properly trained. They were like what, 12, 13, something like that. Like they weren't even capable of defending themselves. They were innocent in everything but their name alone. It's an absolute just complete mishandling, mishap. But again, even though he is completely in the wrong, Rickard Karstark again throws it right back in Robb's face. He's like, I wanted my revenge. He's like, these boys did not murder you or something. He's like, no. But he's like, look at them. And he's like, look at your mother. She murdered them just as much as I. He's like, my mother had nothing to do with this. This was your doing. And he's like, in war, you murder you kill your enemies. Did your father not teach you that? And then, of course, he gets punched in the face by Brynden the Blackfish. And then, of course, he drops the infamous line where he's like, what's it called? He's gonna give me a scolding before he sets me free, our king in the north. Or should I say, I feel like the more proper title for Robb now, let's be honest now, the king who lost the North, ultimately. And it sucks because...
Well, then Robb basically decides to execute him, and I think the Karstark's last words, about haunting him, I want to haunt you. I think that's one of those things where it's like, man, we really see that Robb did lose the North almost in this sequence because
entirely
he has to
solidifying factor, because in this moment he ultimately chooses, once again, very similar to Ned,
honor.
His own honor. He chose honor over making the right, smart, tactical choice. And again, it's another one of those things where, again, the reason why I don't necessarily enjoy the Red Wedding and the build to it is because, unlike the build with Ned, where we were still being introduced to the world, and part of the interest and intrigue of that first season was seeing just how out of his depth Ned was as an honorable man in an unhonorable world, Robb is once again in a situation where everybody and their mother is telling him that he is making the wrong decision. They keep telling him, they're like, keep him alive, keep him as a hostage. You need the Karstark man. Forget just like the deep loyalties that the Starks and the Karstarks have going back. Again, their names are practically so similar, but it's the fact that, again, he needs the troops. He needs the troops, and if he loses the Karstarks, that's half his army right there. But Robb, he goes ahead, he does it, and you can tell too, he's angry. He's angry that he did it in the moment because of how hard his fist is clenched, because he's like, damn. And afterwards, with the scene with Talza, where he's like, damn, it sucks, where even though I know I had to do this in the moment, or at least I thought I had to, it cost me, because
I think in terms of the transparency to the Red Wedding, it definitely, they knew where they were going. They were kind of leading the breadcrumbs for the audience that to really not make it too much of a surprise. Like, I think it's one of those things where it is still shocking, but it's pretty much telegraphed. Like, you understand that something bad's going to happen to Robb by the end of the season. I think that's pretty clear. Like, maybe you thought they were going to lose the war or have to retreat or something like that, but at some point you're basically being set up for something bad to happen to Robb. Yes. It's pretty clear. It's pretty transparent, and I think it's one of those things where you could just see so many places where Robb could have acted differently and it leading to more success. Like, I think the early victories, were definitely, great, like going down, getting Jaime, etc. But I think at some point they should have just took Jaime, their prisoner, and gone back up north and just held him in the dungeons of Winterfell and try to basically rule their territories. I understand that the whole idea of Arya's out there, Sansa's out there, like, that's true. Like, your loved ones are out there, and you definitely don't want to leave them for dead, so to speak. But ultimately, in the middle of a war, like, you're not going to necessarily locate them, or in this case, they think they're in King's Landing. So taking Jaime back north of the wall, or north of the Riverlands, and basically trying to do a prisoner exchange at some point would have probably been a smart bet. But who knows? It's hindsight, right?
Well, look, and the whole thing too is that Robb even admits it. He's like, he knows. He's like, now that the Karstarks are gone, he's like, I have no chance. Again, like, they're in King's Landing. I have no chance. Like, my options at that point, he's like, literally are attack King's Landing, which he knows is pitiful low, or march back north, and he knows that his chances back north are still tough because, again, he doesn't know where Bran and Rickon are, and even if they do retake Winterfell, there are still Ironborn all over the north. And also, he knows, he even says, it's like, our original quest, he's still hell-bent on this quest. He still doesn't have a clue that the quest to avenge Ned is over, but he's still kind of on this. He's like, and Taliesin tells me, like, you need something to motivate them, and he's like, all right, screw it, I'm going to go for Casterly Rock. Again, in my mind, still a terrible decision, because as we learn later on, even Tywin knows there's no stake in Casterly Rock. They have no gold left. They have no mines left. So,
I think that's the best part about the show is everyone wants to go for Casterly Rock, but
even the Lannisters don't care about Casterly Rock.
When it finally gets taken in towards the end of the show, it's like it meant nothing.
Absolutely.
So it's very interesting how they lead us, the audience, and the characters on that wild goose chase of Casterly Rock for the whole series. But ultimately, I think this is the moment where he has that bright idea where it's like, oh, you know what? I should
Praise the guys who I screwed over to begin with.
Yeah, I should actually marry Walter Frey's daughter and get them as allies.
Well, no, he's already married. He's already married. So no, he's going to offer.
Oh no, yeah, he's going to offer. The Blackfish's son.
He's gonna Catelyn's brother, but oh man, Bad
It's
decision after bad decision after bad decision, and this episode is just hammering home. But no, the Karstark scene is really awesome. I love that scene.
I think it's great. I think it's really it's basically like, you know, Karstark is someone who's lived a long life. He has experience on the battlefield. He has some sort of wisdom in the world, and he's basically, you know, looking at Robb and he's telling him hard truths. Even though, you know, it's Robb's going to act the way he does and execute him, Karstark is basically telling him, you know, that he's lost his kingdom.
Yeah.
And, you know, he betrayed the North by acting the way he did. And it's one of those things where those dominoes are going to start to fall into place, and we're going to see exactly what happens when the Starks seemingly lose power of their better men and, you know, the North in general.
Yes, indeed. Absolutely. And this is, of course, the beginning of it. So we got 3 more storylines to cover, 2 brief ones, but the big one, obviously, again, King's Landing, the thing that we still have. Again, this is, again, with all kind of the slow plotting that's been happening in King's Landing, this is, again, where we start to see things really come to fruition. First, obviously, Cersei approaches Littlefinger, who's still packing. He's taking his sweet time getting ready to go to the Eyrie, and she kind of...
Yeah, he probably had the boat commissioned and built, you know.
Probably.
Like,
it certainly is what it feels like, definitely. But again, it's just playing off of Cersei again, once again commissions him and is like, yeah, I kind of need your help. I need you to find out what the Tyrells are up to again. Cersei is desperate to prove herself useful to Tywin here, and she's once again trying to threaten Littlefinger into doing her bidding a lot more implicitly than she did the last time. The last time she just had her guards threaten him. Now she's like, yeah, I know that, you know, she knows that Littlefinger is good with Tywin, so she doesn't have the same pull with him that she does before. And Littlefinger also knows, like, all right, and if I want to stay good with the Lannisters, I got to keep Cersei happy just in general. And through a very, I think, really interesting kind of play of events, the way that we follow this sequence. I love how he has his man. We're introduced to Will Tudor's Polliver, who is revealed to be Loras's new squire, who conveniently places him, and how conveniently, again, seduces Loras by saying, oh yeah, I'm the guy that Littlefinger entrusts to take care of all the unsatisfied husbands who are closeted. This idiot that he does spills his guts to him, and of course he informs Littlefinger.
I think this is one of the most economical sequences I've seen in the show, because it's like, you know, Loras is fighting and training, and he meets him, and then it cuts to the two of them in bed. Then it cuts to...
And you're like, wow, Loras moves that quickly.
Yeah, but then it cuts to basically Littlefinger interrogating the spy. Yeah. And the story is just like, you know, quick vignettes of the whole entire storyline. Yes. You know, it gets us right to the point that, you know, Loras is being played. Littlefinger has, you know, his spies, and, you know, basically is working full tilt with the Lannisters, trying to make sure they have the advantage.
Absolutely. Well, again, they rewarded him with the Eyrie, as he's already the Lord of Harrenhal, and just in general with everything that he's done. So for right now, again, they are still playing to his advantage. It's interesting how last episode, right, we saw Varys making his play by trying to engineer the whole Sansa getting with Tyrells, and now Littlefinger is directly undermining that, and it just shows that, again, still in this moment, Littlefinger is still top dog in that sense, because once the Lannisters find out, and they find out quick, boy, do they. Again, following up a very humorous interaction between Tyrion and Olenna, where Tyrion, again, tries to attempt to request that Olenna basically pay for the wedding because they're kind of broke. And Olenna, once again, after leading him in 18 different directions, basically dropped, oh, right, fine, we'll pay for the wedding, even though basically still kind of reinforcing it's like, yeah, you guys may still run the city, but you still need our support in order to do so. And she does a very humorous sequence. I think
it's like, it's half the wedding, right? Half the cost or
something
like
that.
But,
but he really wants to cover the majority of it, if we're being honest.
Yeah.
Again, the Lannister funds are practically and just the royal funds are practically non-existent.
I think the best part is Tyrion is so proud of himself that he goes into the chamber with, Tywin and Cersei.
And Tywin immediately disregards him. He's like, "Oh, finances, that's your business. That's your, that's your problem.
Don't worry about
important things to do." And he's like, "Well, I did find a way to pay for the royal wedding. You can at least give us that." And of course, it leads to, again, another brilliantly written scene. So let's say that the last season, with the scenes with Tywin and Arya, were the scenes where they were like kind of ironing out like how to specifically like build up like how they were going to use Tywin in the show going forward. But this season is like really where they hit home, because every single scene in the small council chamber that involves Tywin is just a gem. Where just like where just Tywin informs him of the plot that Littlefinger's kind of, engineered him, and he's like, yeah, we bring the Tyrells into the fold, and this is how they repay us. And he's like, Tyrion doesn't really see the issue. He's like, okay, so Loras marries her, who cares, And he's like, so we're gonna just hand the key to the north over to Loras. And Tyrion's like, key to the north? Last I checked, Robb Stark was still alive. Again, continuing to drive home the hint that Robb is not making it past this season, where Tyrion still thinks that Robb is doing fine and dandy. And Tywin almost seems to have this like sixth sense that Robb is not going to be alive much longer. And he's like, the Karstarks have deserted him. Robb's days are numbered. That leaves, and since Theon killed Bran and Rickon, supposedly that leaves Sansa as the key to the north. We need to act quickly. And so, what's it called? And so he's like, we need to, and I believe that I found a suitable match. And Tyrion's like, oh, that's good. And then, of course, the clever jab from Cersei, and Tyrion realizes that Tywin is setting him and Sansa up to be married.
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of those things, Tyrion is pretty much protesting, like, hasn't she been through enough?
And it's interesting, once again, showing that Tyrion is the only Lannister with even a shred of human decency, where it's like, okay, and I know Shay rather unfairly so gives him a lot of shit in the next couple of episodes about whether he actually likes Sansa or not. He's like, it's not like I have a choice just in general, at least but like Tyrion is full on protesting this. Like,
I think the best part is like Tyrion, sort of like understands like, oh my God, this is wrong. Yeah, but there's nothing he could do about it. And then immediately Tywin looks at Cersei and basically says, hey, you're going to be marrying Loras.
Before we get there, right, because that scene is hilarious and amazing in and of itself, because Cersei thinks that she's gotten one over on Tyrion, but then Tywin just flips it right around on her. And exactly. It's really kind of fucked up. That's how he phrases that, where he's like, yeah, you need to marry again and Brienne. And she's like, I'm not some homegrown mare, and he's like, you're my daughter, ultimately. And I love the scene, too, where Tywin is like, you wanted a reward for your services. This is, Sansa is and Winterfell are a far better reward than you could ever hope for. And he's like, you need to be, and it's like, besides this long past time that you were wed. Tyrion kind of reminds him, it's like, yeah, I was wed. Don't you remember? And Tywin's like, only too well. Again, and Tyrion, like I said, does not have a lot of moments to shine this season like he did the last season, but this is one of them, where that line, that deliver, where he just delivers all his behemoth hatred that he has towards his father, like in that one scene. And it's just brilliantly delivered. And then once again, he flips it around on Cersei and tells him, yeah, you're going to marry Loras. Tyrion will secure the north. We'll still secure the Reach and maintain our alliance with the Tyrells. And once again, it builds into Tywin's fatal flaw that his children are nothing but commodities to him. They are not people, they are commodities. And it's shown in this scene, because Cersei thinks that she's been doing all of this work to like kind of get in good with her dad and make sure that she's kind of like, got the new golden child standard. But again, she has the misfortune of being a woman in a still very male-dominated world. And again, that's all. He still only sees her as someone to breed children in order to continue the Lannister name, ultimately.
Oh, yeah. And she's traumatized because her first reaction is like, don't make me do it again,
Please don't make me do this again.
Yeah, and so it's one of those things where Tywin sees them as disappointments. Like, you've been dishonoring the family name, which is all he cares about. Right. Is the name lasts longer than the people, and so it's one of those things where it's a brilliant scene again, where Tywin is just flexing his power, even against his own children. And, it's in terms of like keeping the Lannisters in charge of everything. These moves make total sense. But ultimately we see that Cersei, Tyrion, even basically the Tyrells, like Sansa, everybody's going to be miserable. Yeah, everybody's going to be miserable because of this. But ultimately Tywin wants to get his way because the Lannisters have to stay on top.
Absolutely, yeah. Again, it's minimalism, but this might be my favorite of the King's Landing stuff that happens this season. Ultimately, obviously, we have Tyrion and Sansa, mock wedding, and then obviously, the after effects of the Red Wedding. Like I said, this is again, it's another brilliant scene, and it's so well done. Like I said, every single moment that really happens in this episode is just a banger, just first and foremost. So 2 last sequences that we have to cover within this episode. Ultimately, again, we check back in on Dragonstone after, not really spending that much time there since the first episode. We're introduced to 2 new characters here. We finally meet Stannis Baratheon's family, who we did not see any of in the last season. It's funny because I thought that for the longest time we'd seen Selyse and Shireen Baratheon. They were introduced to in season 2, but the truth is we're not introduced to them until this episode, this season. First, we're introduced to Selyse, his wife, who it's safe to say is not at all mentally there. The way she's talking, she's clearly another Lord of fanatic.
Listen, like the fact is, when they have a discussion, and in the room are 3
jars with
exactly
stillborn children in there, and it's like Jesus Christ.
Yeah, but it's almost from a science fiction story. Like it's the jars are like yellow liquid, and there's this bright light emanating from them that's kind of lighting half half the face of Shireen.
Yep.
And it's very interesting. Like they're basically, the two of them are just talking about, like, hey, I didn't deliver you any, sons, any heirs, but Melisandre did, basically referring to the shadow baby.
And I love too how it's like Stannis is trying to like come clean, right? Because he's feeling guilty for his sins like a season and a half later, which I think is kind of weird and comes out of nowhere considering that we've spent so little time with him within the first half of the season. So that's weird. And that's made even weirder by the fact that Salisa not only okay with it, but encourages it because she sees herself as not worthy because she's become such a fanatic. Like, look, Salisa Baratheon has always been like kind of not all mentally there, just in general. If you see her track record, especially if look no further than the way that she treats her own daughter once Stannis says that he wants to see her, because again, it becomes immediately clear that she does not care about her daughter in that way. But I find it interesting because even though obviously again the impetus just in Westeros and obviously for the longest time just in general throughout the Middle Ages was to have sons so that the sons could continue the family name because obviously daughters unfortunately could not just because of the elements of marriage. But Stannis, it shows, like, has this very clear admiration for his daughter in a way that really not too many other people have. Obviously, I think it's really interesting that this follows up like showing Tywin have such real clear distaste for his daughter as a real human being, seeing her only as a commodity, when it becomes very clear in the next scene when Stannis meets his daughter and it's revealed here that Shireen, obviously another thing about her is that she had grayscale, and the whole thing about grayscale is the Maester was successfully able to cure her as a baby because that's the only time that you're able to cure it, but she still has obviously the scar on her face. And the thing that's introduced here, like, I love Shireen Baratheon. I love her. She's so innocent. She's so plucky. She's one of the few, like, just purely, like, still innocent, still good characters in this harsh world. So, of course, that means she's going to meet a brutal and vicious end after a certain point because Benioff and Weiss are just sociopaths.
Yeah, that's not for another couple seasons. But what this sequence is about is basically her asking Stannis, like, hey,
what happened to Davos? Where is he?
Well, yeah, where's Davos? He promised he would bring me a gift, and all this stuff. And it's like, Stannis can't even really look at her in the eye and give her like a straight answer.
Right.
He basically just mumbles like, he's been in prison, he's a traitor, and that's it. You'll never see him again. And like, that's
the thing that I love that's established here too is, first of all, that Shireen doesn't buy that for a second. She doesn't buy that for a second. She shows that even though, again, she's very young, she's very innocent, and because of that, she's one of the few characters that's been introduced into this world that still has a positive outlook on the world. And because of that, it allows her to go down and see Davos and get his own side. And even though and Davos, and the thing that I love too is that Davos is still trying to maintain the facade, because he still loves and supports Stannis so much to the point that he's even still willing to like try and do this facade for his daughter. But Shireen straight up tells him, like, I don't care, you're my friend and I'm going to help you. And I think the
she's
relationship that develops between these two. It's so sweet, it's so pure because I always see Shireen as the daughter that Davos never had, and Davos even comes to regard her almost as a second daughter as they continue to go throughout. And it's still, again, I still go back to their last interaction that they have together in season 5 when Stannis sends him away before, and their last interaction that he has with Shireen, and then the reaction that he has once he finds out that she's died and how she's died.
I think it's one of those things where this character is just really authentic.
Yes.
The fact is, because of the dragon scale, because of where Dragonstone is, because of Stannis himself is kind of a recluse. The fact is, she is isolated, but she's a princess and she's well educated. She's well read to a certain degree, and the fact is, her innocence and her education really make this character, because, like, yes, she doesn't know 100% about the world. She's not going to basically be giving people advice as if she was like a 70-year-old scholar. But what can she do? She can basically investigate what happened to Davos, go into the dungeon when the guard is sleeping. She knows the movements of the guards in the castle, and essentially recognizes that Davos doesn't know how to read, and it's like, well, you know what? I know how to read,
like,
so I'm gonna teach you. And so it's one of those things where
being also a really crucially important sequence, because even though Davos literally spends the majority of his arc throughout the rest of the show, learning how to read from Shireen and teaching himself how to read, it ultimately proves vital when he frees Gendry and Stannis is about to execute him again, but he's able to read the letter from Maester Aemon that tells them about the Night's Watch that eventually, dictates Stannis' choice to take the fight north, So, again, very important seeds that are still being laid here.
Yeah, and no, and I think basically this relationship between the two of them, it really helps elevate Davos. I think Davos is by far one of the best characters of the entire series, and
Absolutely.
it comes through right here, right now, this interaction with Stannis' daughter. Basically the two of them having this bond. Obviously he's stuck in prison for a little bit, but so it gives screen time to Davos before he gets released and back in Stannis' good grace. But like you said, it does plant the seed for his newfound ability to read to really play a part in later storylines.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things where, again, just like the fact that like that there could be a character that's still this innocent in the show but still has such good intentions. I don't know, it just creates a kind of like that warm fuzzy feeling that Game of Thrones doesn't give you too often, but it makes it so satisfying, and it just makes it that much more tragic and heartbreaking just ultimately where it goes. But again, it's ultimately crucially important just as the trajectory of the show. We got one more storyline to cover. It's brief. We briefly check in with Daenerys across the Narrow Sea in the immediate aftermath of the Astapor victory, where her and the Unsullied are marching to the next slaver city. You got a really interesting back and forth that's happening between Jorah and Barristan, where they're telling war stories. Jorah's talking about the breach of Pike and how he fought there. That was a very important moment for him, because that's where he was knighted. Ultimately, talks about Thoros being the first one through the gate with the flaming sword. And then obviously he talks with Barristan. He's kind of probing Barristan to see how much he knew from when he served with Robb and Baratheon back in season 1 when Jorah was secretly spying on them. He wants to see how much Barristan knows, trying to cover his tracks. Barristan, it's really interesting because, again, this is another vital change for the books, because in the books, when Barristan joins Daenerys, he's undercover and keeping his identity a secret, because in the books, Barristan did serve on Robert's small council, so he did know that Jorah was a traitor. And when his identity is revealed in the books, once he learns who Daenerys is, he tells her, obviously, and exposes Jorah's treachery. But in the show, Barristan never served in the small council. Barristan never had any knowledge of what's going on. He even says that he had a distaste for politics. He has no knowledge of Jorah's treachery, and Jorah's just trying to make sure and cover his tracks there. But Barristan's also saying, Barristan's also kind of trying to flex a little bit as far as like trying to show his authority. And Jorah's telling him, is like, look, you're just another exile just like the rest of us, and I only take my orders from Daenerys. You've been with her a lot less than I have. It really sucks kind of that we had so little sequences to me between Jorah and Barristan, because we only have one more season with the two of them serving her before Jorah is revealed as a traitor and ousted, and then Barristan dies shortly into season 5, because it's really interesting kind of to see like the different sensibilities that they bring, where Jorah is an exile, right? He was from the north, but he kind of sees Daenerys almost as a kindred daughter and like an emotional connection in a way that he hasn't really had in a long time, versus Barristan served with her family, right? So he kind of has a knowledge and understanding of the Targaryens that not even Jorah has. So it's really interesting to see their back and forth. And then obviously we have the sequence where we're introduced to Grey Worm for the first time, and Grey Worm, and she announces, brings up the officers and says, okay, you're free men, you need a commander to command you. And they bring up Grey Worm, and she's like, Daenerys is kind of disgusted by these demeaning names that they've gotten that are essentially their slave names. But Grey Worm takes the option to keep his name, because he's like, yeah, I'm gifted with this name. My real name was Cursed, because that was the name that from when I was taken as a slave, but Grey Worm is the name I had when Daenerys set me free, And I think that's it's a really important moment. It's so well written. It's the emphasis, the point is driven right home as far as what it's trying to accomplish. And again, there's not a single bad moment in this entire episode for me. Like, you don't get any wasted storylines. You don't get more excess torture of Theon. You don't get more just Bran wandering around in Dreamland.
Don't worry about it. Theon's coming.
Theon's coming. Exactly. Oh, we know. But again, it's another example of just that this is probably one of the best well-written episodes of the season, even if not at all of the storylines necessarily cohesively flow. The character moments are so great. The awesome moments are so great. Even the moments that feel like they're obvious and being driven home, they're done in a way that feel like they're impactful. Like the Karstark, the loss of the Karstarks really does truly feel like a loss for Robb. Like kind of the Jaime being at his lowest and at his most rock bottom, Jon really finding himself at this real crossroads, Arya finding herself at this real crossroads, the King's Landing storyline coming to fruition with the plot, and Tyrion really once again thinking that he can go no lower and then consistently being proven wrong. Just like all the character moments are so well written, they're so well thought out. There's just an understanding that happens with all these characters and where they're at this point in the journey that I feel like is not really, I think, done as well in any other point in the show, at least not past season 4. But I don't know. What do you think as far as that goes?
Listen, I think this episode is sort of like since it's right in the middle of the season, it is kind of a gem. And we're about to hit the area where it's the quiet before the storm, right? It's going to start building up to the end of the the season here. So I think it's one of those things where, like, comparatively to, I don't know. I really enjoy getting these intense character moments and being able to sort of, pause the main storylines. Like, yeah, we can kind of see the pieces be put into play,
right?
But we're really just going deep into the characterization. And I don't quite remember how many other episodes really are as character driven,
Right.
As this one is.
Like,
they kind of creep up on you and hit you.
Yeah. I feel like the last one we got before this was A Man Without Honor, which had a lot of surprising character moments with it. And then again, there's not too many that I remember from season 4, because season 4 is another one of those seasons where the even seasons are all action driven, where there's so much happening at every minute of season 4 that is just constantly pushing the plot forward. I really think that the only major character moment, the character driven episode really that happens in that season is the Laws of Gods and Men, the Tyrion trial episode. But even that, again, I don't remember the ancillary storylines in that episode, so I will have to see that when I go back and rewatch. But for me, at least, with how awesome and how character focused and character driven this episode is, this is my favorite episode so far on this rewatch. I love this episode. I loved it every single time I watched it previously. Like, this, even more so than Blackwater, I'm saying that this is my absolute favorite episode so far of the 25 episodes that we've watched so far in the rewatch. So that was it. That was a recap of season 3, episode 5, entitled Kissed by Fire. For me, the best episode so far in our rewatch. Is an amazing episode. I heavily recommend going back and rewatching it if you haven't been rewatching the show just in general. And of course, you can keep up to date with more Talkin Thrones episodes that we will continue to release every single Sunday for the foreseeable future. Pat, where can the good people find you on the interwebs?
Hey, listen, right now, I'm here at Talkin TV, just Talkin Thrones with you, Dom. I also have an Instagram that I threaten to post on at Patrick W. Huber. Maybe one day. Hey, it's I gotta get up on it, but I typically enjoy looking at everybody else's beautiful photos, but maybe one day I'll
those
start
iPhone
posting
13 cameras, man, they are next level.
Oh, God. No, I don't have any iPhone 13,
yeah, me neither,
but hey, if people want to spend that money, then have at it. If it makes you happy, then go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, you can follow me Facebook and Instagram at Movie Nerd Reviews, but more importantly, follow us on the podcast, Instagram and Facebook at Talkin TV Podcast. Be sure to also click the subscribe button, click the like button, leave a comment below, click the bell next to the subscribe button. That way you guys get notified every time we put up new content. As far as content goes this week, new episode where we cover Dune, Denis Villeneuve's 2021 adaptation of Frank Herbert's novel, on tomorrow. And then this coming Thursday, the next episode of Succession, the recap of season 3 that Dustin and I are doing going forward on the channel. Also, be sure to, if you haven't already, to check out our Shocktober Halloween first-time watch series, which we just concluded last week with the ranking series. That was a lot of fun. And if you guys want to get the
did you guys review Halloween Kills?
We did, and it was Chris's number 12, and it was my number 11. So that should tell you all that we know about all that we.
How long did you talk about the staring out the window parts?
I talked about that in the review, not as much in the ranking, because again, it was one of those moments where I'm like, why is this here? Why we're past scenes like this? Why are scenes like this still making it into these goddamn movies? But I don't know.
I guess I'm gonna have to jump on YouTube and check out your thoughts.
Yeah. Look, all I know is the less said about that movie, the better. It's already made my top 10 worst of the year just in general. Again, you guys can check all of that out and more by continuing to browse this channel, continuing to support us. That way we guys can get you, the people, the content that it is that you deserve. As always, remember, 12 seasons in a short film. Watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next week. Peace out.